Okay. Good afternoon and welcome to Lunch with the League. Before we start, I would like to make a few announcements. Please remain muted throughout the session, and there will be a Q&A session after we hear from our speaker today. So if you have any questions for them, please put them in the chat directed to Betsy Patterson. Finally, I would like to advise you that this session is being recorded, and the link to the recording of each of these sessions will be available on our league website within 48 hours. The link to the website is in the chat. And now I would like to introduce Kathy Morgan, our co-chair of Voter Services, who will make a few opening remarks and introduce our guest today, Michelle Ascencion.
Thank you, Pat. The League is pleased to continue our Lunch and Learn with the League series with the goal of informing citizens about different facets of our local government. We hope that you will find today's presentation very informative. We are pleased to have Michelle Ascencion, our Ventura County Clerk-Recorder Registrar of Voters, with us today to speak about the upcoming primary elections and what being a Voters' Choice Act county means to Ventura County. Michelle has a BS in journalism from Cal Poly San Luis Obispo. She has been a certified municipal clerk since 2009, a master municipal clerk since 2020, and a California registered election official since 2002. She came to her current position with 15 years of local government service, including working for the city of Port Hueneme as an executive specialist in the city manager's office, working as the Deputy City Clerk of Port Hueneme, as well as the Clerk of the Board of the Ventura Regional Sanitation District. In 2016, she was elected as City Clerk of Oxnard, where she served for 4 years before joining the County of Ventura. Upon her election as Ventura County Clerk-Recorder Registrar of Voters, she made history by becoming the first woman elected as Ventura County Clerk-Recorder and the second African-American elected to a Ventura County office, and the first African-American woman. Please join me in welcoming Michelle.
Hi, everybody. Good afternoon.
Thank you for being here, Michelle. Do you
Thanks for
want to
having
say
me.
a few words, or shall we just get started with the questions?
Um, we can get started.
Okay. Well, again, thank you for being here. I know that many of the people who are listening probably know a lot of the questions that's being answered, but there might be some who don't that are being asked, but there might be some that don't. So let's just start with the basics. Could you please describe how the primary election is different from the general election, including the top two Open Primary Act in California, which took effect in 2011? And could you also answer the question, will candidates who receive 50% plus one in March still go on to the general election, or does that vary by race? By the race, I should say.
Yes. Okay. Thank you. So the primary election is a little bit different from the general election. There's a presidential primary in presidential years, gubernatorial primary in gubernatorial years, and the months that those are held are even different from each other. So for the presidential primary, that will be held in March. The gubernatorial primary will be held in June. They used to all be held in June, but California got tired of being left behind in the presidential primary process, because by the time it got all the way down to June, most of the states had already, done their primaries, and it was pretty much decided by then. So California decided to join Super Tuesday in March, along with a good number of the other states. Mm-hmm. So that's how that came to be. Now, the primary purpose of a primary is to narrow down the field of candidates for the parties. So earlier on, when there were more party-specific contests, that was, it's how it narrowed down by party. But now with the top two open primary for the state and the congressional races, those just go to the top two. Top two will advance on to the general election. For president, however, that's going to be the contest that is specific to the registered parties. And the top winner in each of those contests is going to be the nominee, that party's nominee for the November general. Now for the local races, judge and county races, those are going to be a 50% plus one race. So someone can win their contest outright in the primary if they achieve that minimum threshold. Otherwise, if it's a crowded race with numerous candidates, then if no one reaches that 50% mark, then the top two will go on to the general in November. Now, in the general, all voters are going to vote all contests. There are no party-specific contests. So Republican, Democrat, Green Party, Peace and Freedom, all of those nominees for president are going to be on everyone's ballot, and everyone gets to vote for those. And then another very specific primary aspect is the central committee races that are specific to each party. A lot of times there are, say, 5 seats and there are 5 candidates, and they go ahead and just appoint those candidates without having to put it on the ballot. But if the number of candidates exceeds the number of seats that are available, then it'll go to the ballot, of course, and the top number, the number of candidates, say there's 5 seats, for example, excuse me, the top 5 finishers will go ahead and win those outright in the primary.
Okay, thank you. So in Ventura County, the supervisorial and the judicial races, if someone gets 50 plus 1, that will be the end of the contest.
Yes.
And what I'm understanding you to say is that in the primary, aside from the presidential primary, it doesn't matter which of the two which party preference, what party they represent. But like for Senate and so on, if there's 2, even if they're the same party, they are the top 2 vote getters. They will be the 2 contestants for the general election. Is that correct?
Yes. So for the statewide offices, assembly, or even the district state offices, assembly, Senate, and then if there are statewide offices, governor, lieutenant governor, attorney general, all those, then those, and Congress and Senate, those top 2 finishers will be the November runoff contestants.
Thank you. Can you please describe what a no party preference voter needs to do, what steps they must take if they wish to vote in the presidential primary, and how are you informing voters about what they need to do?
Yeah, for the presidential primary, this is a really important question because the presidential contest is party specific. So the folks registered Democrat, they're going to vote for the Democratic slate of candidates. The folks registered Peace and Freedom, they'll vote for the Peace and Freedom registered candidates. But then where does that leave the no party preference? Mm-hmm. And that's interestingly the biggest group, or I'm sorry, the fastest growing group of registered voters. We're up to about 20% now across the county. So if you're not an NPP, it's likely you know someone who's NPP. So we're trying to really advertise what the options are for the no party preference voters in this election. Now, if for the NPPs, you'll have all the other races on your ballot, Senate, Congress, supervisor, if you happen to be in one of the districts that's up for election, et cetera. But if you want to vote for president, that contest will not appear on your NPP ballot. Mm-hmm. So the statewide parties have the option of either allowing NPPs to what's called crossover and vote on a NPP version of their ballot, mm-hmm. Or they can choose not to allow that. And then if an NPP wants to vote that ballot, they would have to re-register in that party. So for example, the parties that allow for crossover voting are the Democratic, the American Independent, and the Libertarian parties. So if an NPP voter says, I want to vote for Biden, they're going to ask for the NPP version of the Democratic ballot. And that's an important distinction. They're not voting the Democratic ballot unless they re-register. If they're crossing over, they're only voting in that presidential contest. They're not getting the Central Committee races on theirs. That's only for registered Democrats.
All right.
So yeah, there's just all these different kinds of rules and exceptions, and it's a little bit cumbersome. But then if someone chooses to vote Green or Peace and Freedom or Republican, they are going to have to re-register in that party, and they'll receive the full, Republican or Green or Peace and Freedom version of the ballot with the presidential contest and the Central Committee races as well.
And that's because those parties did not choose to have an open. Yeah. Okay.
Correct. That's correct.
I don't know how you keep all this in your head. There's a lot of ins and outs of all that. So thank you.
There are a ton, yes. And so then you asked about, actually, let me go back and mention that the deadlines for them to be able to take these actions. If you want to request a crossover ballot, you would need to do that by February the 27th. If you wish to re-register, you would have to do that by February the 20th. And normally there's a 15-day, I think there's a later question about registration deadlines, but so, okay, we'll revisit that later. But we have been, besides the election education series, which we have posted on our website, and you're welcome to go back and look at those videos. We're working on the videos for the last two. They should be posted by this week. Or see handouts or FAQs or links to outside websites that have more information. But the postcards, there were several postcard mailings prior to this upcoming election. Two of them went to all registered voters, and that's a requirement of the Voters' Choice Act. But there was a special mailing to only the NPP voters. And that was telling them about their upcoming options for participating in the presidential contest. We sent those out back in November, and we asked them to take an action by the end of December.
Mm-hmm.
The reason why we requested it so early is because as we are preparing our data for the mail vendor to send out all the ballots, we would love to have as many people who are requesting crossover or registration in that first set of data for the first mail drop, because then it saves money not having to do subsequent mailings. So if we can get them the right ballot the first time, per their request, then that's just one less mailing and less money that we have to spend. Let's see, besides the postcard, the election education series, each of those postcards that went out to every registered voter had the same information on it. We had a special page on our website talking about the no party preference options. We even added a fun pop-up whenever you come to our website. It pops up and says, hey, if you're an NPP voter, make sure that you take actions if you want to vote for president. Social media, a lot of pushes on social media, and then also statewide, the SOS is also publicizing it as well. We issued a number of press releases that include that messaging, one specifically for the NPP options, one for, hey, the ballots are coming out, and you'll want to take advantage of your options if you're NPP. And then I've been going around speaking to a lot of different groups and constantly pushing that same message so that people will get it. It's hard because these presidential primaries, they only come around once every 4 years, and folks don't always remember from 2020 to 2024 and beyond how this thing works. So I figured it would be a good thing to really push that message in multiple different formats so that we could really make sure that people are educated as well as possible.
Well, it certainly sounds to me as if you've done a lot of outreach, and I'm sure everybody appreciates all that. So thank you for that. You mentioned when you were talking about in this last question about the Voters' Choice Act. So that happens to lead right into our next question was, can we just talk a little bit about it? Can you discuss how and when the county decided to adopt the VCA, please?
Yes, absolutely. So the Voters' Choice Act was legislation adopted in 2016 at the state level that allowed counties to opt into this newer voting model that allowed for multiple options for voters to cast their ballot. Under the traditional polling place model, you know that there's a particular polling place that you're assigned to. Usually it's like the school down your street or the library or the church around the corner. And the precinct was specific to your geographical location. And then you had the one day to be able to vote there in person. Back in the old days, you could request an absentee ballot. Somewhere around 2002, you were able to become a permanent VBM, excuse me, and automatically receive a vote by mail ballot for each election. But in general, most people were, I'm sorry, I shouldn't say most. Some folks were still on the in-person one day drop-in voting at their precinct. Mm-hmm. In fact, by the time we went to the Voters' Choice Act, we had over 70%, I think it was close to 74%. So that's 3/4 of our voters were already permanent VBM. But when the Voters' Choice Act was adopted, it started with just a handful of counties kind of piloting the project. And what that allowed for at the time was every registered voter getting a ballot, the vote center model, which has fewer locations, but they were open for more days. And you could visit anyone within your county. It didn't just have to be the one that you were assigned to. You could visit any location and you had multiple days to visit. Or you could utilize your vote by mail ballot. So 2020 was the last polling place. March 2020 primary was the last polling place election that we had. And then what happened not a couple weeks later? The whole world was turned upside down by COVID.
Right.
So then it sent us, and I say us, I'm speaking on behalf of elections. I wasn't in the office at the time. I was still the city clerk at Oxnard, but it kind of trickled down to the cities because we were coordinating with the county to conduct our November elections for the city councils. So it was a really crazy time. The county, everybody was scrambling, trying to figure out how are we going to conduct this election in November, this big general election, presidential. And it was really difficult to, number one, find the nearly 400 polling places because everything was shut down. Mm-hmm. It was darn near impossible to find 2,000 poll workers because people were told to stay home.
Right.
So we had to find a different way to do this. And what the Secretary of State's office allowed was I actually think it was per the governor's executive orders. Regardless, the counties were allowed to utilize a Voters' Choice Act like model, which allowed for, rather than doing the full 10 days of early voting, doing 3 days of early voting with vote centers. That meant fewer locations. That meant fewer staff. They were working more days, but it just drastically reduced the number of people that we had to find. And then everybody was getting a vote by mail ballot. Mm-hmm. So in utilizing that model for the November 2020 election, we saw a huge turnout number and the number is escaping me. I want to say it was, I think it was 86%, but I'm not certain. I'm sorry. don't have that number at my fingertips, but that's a huge turnout. I mean, it really is when you're used to seeing, below 50% to get that high. And a lot of people were using their vote by mail ballot. And it turns out that people like having that mail ballot to be able to complete at home at their convenience, drop it in a drop box, mail it back, take it to a vote center. And it just really went a long way as far as providing convenience to the voters.
Mm-hmm.
So then elections thought we might as well go full VCA. I mean, this is something that our voters are actually benefiting from. So the process for that is working with the Secretary of State's office to approve a plan. And I think, that's a later question, unless you want me to go ahead and address it now.
Go for it.
Okay. The election administration plan contains your county's specific plan as to how you're going to implement the Voters' Choice Act locally. It speaks to the outreach efforts, the providing for the different languages, providing for accessibility, and just all the different aspects that go into implementing Voters' Choice Act. We submitted, well, before submitting, we had a draft that we posted on our website, held public workshops for our different communities to be able, language communities, disability community, and then just the general public to review and comment on, and public hearings, receiving public comment, implementing a good number of those suggestions and ideas, and then finalizing the election administration plan for submittal to the Secretary of State's office. And then they receive it, they review it. If they have either questions or refinements or revisions, we kind of go back and forth a little bit on that. And then ultimately, we got approved in early 2022. And actually, we kind of piloted the Voters' Choice Act-like model in both November 2020 and the September 2021 gubernatorial recall election, because we were still kind of under COVID restrictions at that time. Mm-hmm. But so then getting approval in early 2020 allowed us to hold both the 2020 primary in June and the 2022 primary and the 2022 general in November under the Voters' Choice Act. And it's been going great. The vote by mail requirement has actually changed at the state level. I think the state also saw that, hey, vote by mail is a pretty good thing. A lot of counties, who piloted the Voters' Choice Act model for the 2020 elections, also saw very good turnout numbers. So the state legislature and the governor ultimately signed legislation that went ahead and made vote by mail, universal vote by mail mailing available to all active registered voters throughout the county, whether a county is VCA or still on the polling place model.
You can hardly argue with 86% of voters voting. That's a wonderful number. And of course, since we want to have our democracy depends on an engaged electorate. So that's great. Thank you. You talked quite a bit about the advantages of using the VCA model, and I appreciate that. And even got in a little bit of some of the questions up ahead, but you mentioned how difficult it would have been to find enough used to be called poll workers, now election workers, during COVID, which is totally understandable. But I'm wondering, and I think other people are too, with the political climate and some of the harassment that election workers have been reported about election workers in recent years, is it increasingly hard to recruit election workers in this political climate? And does the county have the financial and personnel resources to collect the ballots from all the locations, evaluate all the signatures according to SOS regulations, Secretary of State regulations, tabulate the mail ballots, perform an audit, and all the other many aspects of conducting and reporting results of elections?
Yeah, so as far as the difficulty in recruiting, I've got to say that, knock on wood, here in Ventura County, we are very, very, very fortunate. It's not like it is here. It's not as bad here as it is in other parts of the state, other parts of the country. Yeah, there's some disagreement, conflict, but for the most part, the naysayers are minimal. And incidents with election worker harassment are fortunately there have been very few.
Wonderful.
That doesn't mean that we don't still get yelled at, cussed out. People send us middle finger emojis. People write love notes on their ballots. That I think that's just kind of the nature of public service. It's just kind of how it is. Sometimes you're a public pinata too. That's just the way it is. So we do have a difficult time recruiting, but I don't know that it's all because of fear. I think it may just be, some of it may be attributable to the just tough labor market that's out there. I know that my counterparts in the other agencies, the other county agencies, are also having trouble hiring people. So, and then, under the Voters' Choice Act, it's a bit more of a commitment because, polling place, they come for 1 day of training, they serve 1 day, they get their little stipend. It's a kind of a not quite as much of a commitment level as it is working multiple days and more days of training, a bit more complicated process. So, it is harder, but it may just be due to a number of things, coming out of COVID, the job market, the fact that, fast food workers can make, what is it, $15, $16 an hour now, with, probably less stress and or conflict than what they may face working at a vote center. So it's just a lot of employers are competing right now. And so I don't want to pin it all on the political climate. Who knows?
Well, we all know that Ventura County is a great place, and I'm glad to hear that you're having less problems here than maybe some of your counterparts are having. So that's good news to hear. So do you feel confident that you will have the personnel necessary to accomplish all the steps for the election?
I think so. I mean, we start our recruitment efforts early enough to, get people in. In my visits to speak at clubs and whatever, besides talking about the NPP message, I'm also, kind of a walking billboard for a walking help wanted ad for election workers. So we get a number of people who come back from previous elections and they love to serve, and they do find a lot of reward from it. And then we've got a lot of support just within our county family in utilizing current county employees as election workers. So that's kind of an arrangement that we work out with our agency counterparts, and they let us borrow their staff for usually for those last 4 days of voting, the 3 early days beginning March 2nd. And then everyone works on election day, March the 5th. So I think we'll do it. And then when worse comes to worse, and it's, the day that we need to go out and pick up the ballots from the drop boxes and lock them at 8 p.m. on election night. Sometimes we utilize, the ace in our back pocket is the friends and family plan, where it's like we recruit spouses, adult kids, parents, siblings, anybody that we can get to, go through the quick training, get equipped with their safety vest and their equipment, and take care of ballot retrieval on election night that way. So yeah, we will make it happen. Feel free to send anybody our way who you think would make a great election worker, or anybody who wants to sign up. I promise you'll get a lot out of it, and you will enjoy it, and you'll work with some really great people, and you'll serve your community, which has, so much personal reward and fulfillment to it. So
Well,
yeah, we're going to get there.
I will refer anybody I can think of. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
You mentioned drop boxes, and I know that there, all around the country, there's some question about the safety and security of drop boxes. Can you describe the security measures taken for the drop boxes in Ventura County, and how you decide where to place them?
Sure. The Dropbox design itself is meant to prevent tampering. I don't want to get into all the safety features, but just in the design and the installation, it's going to keep it from walking away, from getting broken into, ripped apart, any of those kinds of things. So I suppose if someone had a bulldozer or a crane, they could probably take it out, but that doesn't seem likely, and we don't anticipate that's happening. In going around to retrieve the ballots, the chain of custody requirements are that no one is ever allowed to be alone with ballots. So there's always going to be a minimum of 2 people handling ballots, retrieving ballots, feeding them through machinery at any time. Mm-hmm. So our ballot retrieval teams go out in pairs. They drive together, they open the box and put them in the bag together, seal it up, and they bring it back together back here to elections. And then same thing in our office when people are running ballots, running envelopes. Signature verification is done in a big open room where everyone, is looking over each other's shoulders. So there's no hazards to the ballots that way.
How often are the boxes emptied, Michelle?
The elections code dictates particular frequency for retrieval, depending on how close you are to the election. The closest to election, it has to be at least 48 hours. But we generally get most of them every day because, they're getting full, especially in the really busy locations. Some of the more remote, lesser used ones may not get it every day, but they are getting retrieved very frequently. And while we're out there, we're looking to make sure nobody's taped flyers to the side or put stickers on it or anything like that that's not supposed to be on there. Mm-hmm. I just remembered you asked about how we cite the locations. Mm-hmm. In the VCA requirements, the Secretary of State has a checklist of citing criteria. It's, located someplace that's easily accessible, as visible as possible is always preferred, so that there's always a lot of eyes on it all the time. It's not just kind of tucked in a corner where you don't always see the people approaching it. Ideally it would be near public transportation or any busy high trafficked areas where people will be able to get to it easily. And there's a similar citing criteria for vote center placement as well. So, those are some of the tools that we utilize to get those ballot boxes placed. Fortunately, the permanent vote by mail boxes are going to stay fixed that way. We did have to move one and install one over at the CSUCI campus. But it's the vote centers that may shift around a little bit from election to election, just depending on the site's availability.
Thank you. You briefly mentioned the signature verification process in the last answer. Do you have any more to add about how that works, aside from having two people there?
Sure. I just want to remind everybody who votes by mail to please remember to sign your envelope. It just makes things so much easier. And when you sign it, it comes back to us. The machine scans the barcode and is able to bring up your record and compare your signature at a pretty high rate. And it'll separate the good signature matches with the either missing signatures or questionable signatures. And then it's double checked, even the ones that are counted as good matches, everything gets double checked by a human verifier who's going to check it visually. And they have the little wand where they can scan the barcode, bring it up on their computer screen and check the signature visually. If they pull up the signature, I believe the signature that comes up in your record is the most recent registration signature. And so if they look at it and could go kind of either way, like, I'm not sure if this is a match, what they can do is they can bring up your signature history. So that's going to show all of your previous registrations. It's going to show all of your previous vote by mail signature scans. And then that way they can look at it and go, oh yeah, this is this person's signature because look how they signed it here in 2018 or whatever. So it's a really handy tool. And it's so interesting to pull up someone's record and see, even if, say you've got an injury to your hand and your signature is kind of changed a little bit, maybe got a little shakier or something. When you are able to compare it to all of that history, it's really remarkable to see, oh, you can see that this is still this person's signature. It's just a little shakier.
Right.
So it's kind of cool. If you ever stop by the office sometime, I'll show you the signature history.
Well, that would be cool. I know you mentioned not signing your ballot, the envelope. That happened to my elderly father one time. He mailed it in and didn't sign it, and he received a letter from
Yep.
the office and asking him to sign it. And at the time, I was also thinking, at that point, I mean, he's older now, but he was in his late 80s. His signature must have varied throughout the year. How do they even tell? But you've just described that. And, I think that that people's signature changes with time, with age and everything. But anyway, so when people do not sign their ballot, you mentioned it's much easier if they do, but not their ballot, the envelope.
Envelope, yes.
You do reach out, as at least my father had. You want to describe that process a little bit?
Sure. So that's a process called curing your signature. We'll send a letter that says, "Hey, voter, you appears that you didn't sign your ballot envelope when you returned it to us. If you could just sign this form, this piece of paper, send it back to us. We'll be able to use that as if it were your signature on your vote by mail ballot." Or if there's a signature that doesn't match, sometimes if there's someone who's trying to vote that ballot for them, that'll generate a call from that voter back to our office to say, I did not submit that ballot. So, it's just another one of those fraud prevention measures to ensure that the vote by mail ballots that are being returned are truly voted by that particular voter.
Thank you for elaborating on that. You hear a lot in the news about voting machines, and I know in our conversations you have emphasized to me that we do not have voting machines. We have ballot marking devices. Could you please explain to everybody the difference between, or if there even is such a thing as a voting machine anywhere, but in Ventura County and in California, what we use, please?
Yeah. There may be in other parts of the country a voting machine where people cast their ballot, or I'm sorry, they literally vote on the machine and the memory of that ballot is stored within the machine itself, the computer, and then it's downloaded somehow into like a central tabulation. We don't do that here. We tabulate paper ballots. So when people walk into a vote center and they see these screens on the tables or in the booths, they're looking at it and thinking, aha, voting machine. But it's not. it's a ballot marking device. So just like if you filled in your ballot with your ink pen, you can use the ballot marking device with the touch screen to be able to make your selections that way. And then once you've done that, it prints out a ballot, and that is what's used for the counting. The nice thing about the ballot marking devices is that they are fully ADA compatible. So if you have a visual impairment, you can increase the font size to be able to see more clearly. You can make the screen brighter, dimmer. If you need to be able to listen to an audio version of the ballot, you can do that on the ballot markers. And for those who have adaptive devices, like there's this thing that's called a sip and puff, they can plug it into the ballot marker and navigate through the ballot with their device and print it out that way. So it's really cool. It has this little like navigation paddle that looks like a video game controller. So a lot of kids that come in accompanying their parents to vote, they think, oh, wow, it's a video game. Nope, not a video game, not a toy. It is definitely just used for official purposes. And that ballot marking device is going to be loaded up. We test it during the pre-lat process when we're testing all of our equipment. Excuse me, but it's preloaded with the 20 ballot types that we have for this election. For November, there will be a lot more ballot types, but these 20 ballot types are specific to the district that you reside in and your party status, whether you're voting your party, your NPP, or you are doing a crossover. So those are, we can activate it. The election worker will activate it for the voter with their specific precinct for their home address.
Is that testing process, is there any public portion of that? I know my sister who lives in Montana says it's advertised in the paper and you can come and view the testing portion.
Yeah, we do advertise it on our website. We've got write up a full memo ahead of every election that talks about the activities leading up to the election and tell people what activities they can expect to see on each date if they want to come and observe that. And pre-lat is one of those observable activities.
Okay, thank you. So the other thing we hear a lot is that voting machines are connected to the internet and therefore susceptible to hacking. And would you like to make any comments on that?
No, they're not connected to the internet. So that's kind of the short answer on that. It's all on a closed system and there's no internet connection.
Excellent.
And with the testing prior to the election and the manual hand tally after, it's not after the election, it's during canvass, we're able to verify that there hasn't been any tampering or anything weird happening with the machines or the counts being off.
Well, that's good to know. So, I'm talking a lot about different rumors or allegations that go around. And so another one is an allegation that dead people are voting or that you can register yourself twice or your cat or vote in 2 different states. Has this been a problem in our county, and what precautions are made to prevent this, and what happens if someone is found to be committing voter fraud?
So the beauty of elections in California is that we have a centralized database for our state. I don't know what other states do, but I know here in California, we use VoteCal, which holds all of the registration information for every registered voter throughout the state. And then each county has a portal into their share of the information for their resident. So in the registration process, it goes to the Secretary of State. And when someone provides you got to provide your name, your address, your date of birth, and then some kind of identifying information like either the last 4 digits of your social or your driver's license number, which if you're registering at the DMV, that's done. But those things are required so that at the Secretary of State level, your identity can be verified and then your registration can be approved. If any of those pieces are missing, then we reach back out to the voter and let them know that, look, we need you to either complete your registration by providing us the information we need, or if you're going to be participating in the upcoming election, if you go to the vote center, be prepared to bring ID with you, or provide a copy of your ID if you are voting by mail. So those ballots will be held. Even if someone votes by mail, that ballot will still be held if they haven't provided the required vote by mail, required ID that they need to complete their registration. And in the voter's record, it's flagged to say ID required, first-time federal voter.
So in other words, just because you think you filled out the registration form online, if you did not include the necessary information, that does not mean you're registered. Correct. Okay, great. I want to be cognizant of your time and everybody else's, so I am going to skip to one last question and then turn it over to Betsy to see if she has any questions from the attendees, if that's okay with you.
Yeah, I'm sorry about that. Sorry that we didn't get through all the questions.
Well, that's okay. There were a lot of questions here. Just trying to think of everything because I know people have questions. But our league and many others would like to find ways to encourage young or inactive voters to take place in elections so that their voices may be heard. How do you think the league could coordinate with your efforts and encourage young voters that their vote is their voice and their power?
I think the league already does an amazing job. I mean, I see you guys everywhere. You're on the campuses, you're at all of these community events, you're at the Ventura County Fair, you're at Juneteenth, you're at the Wyoming Beach Festival. I mean, you are everywhere. So I think you're doing a really good job. Voter turnout is the sum of a number of factors, from voter motivation to ease of participation to a little bit of pressure from friends or family. So I really think that we all have to just work together to work our different angles and try to encourage that participation. And that's really the beauty of the Voters' Choice Act. It's like you're getting the ballot in the mail, and you can just drop it off, send it back. You don't have to stand in line. You don't have to take time off of work. So that's all those things add up to the turnout numbers that we see.
Yes, well, we all try to do our best, and sometimes it takes people more than one time to hear the information before they decide they're going to step out and, decide to register. I'll put in one last question. Ventura County is a diverse community with a fairly significant proportion of registered voters who have a preferred language other than English. How does your office reach out to these voters as well as to voters who don't have access to online information from credible sources prior to elections?
So the two required languages in California are English and Spanish. And then the Secretary of State, following each census, takes a look at the census data for each county and determines what languages they meet the threshold for being required for voting materials. So we try to utilize the media of different communities. The weird thing about Ventura County is a lot of our media is LA County, and not a lot of it is specific to our county. So to try to utilize other language media for Ventura County use is difficult because we don't really have. So our other languages are Chinese, Vietnamese, Tagalog, and Gujarati, which is an Indian dialect. We don't really have a lot of media channels that include those. So that kind of outreach is difficult. But we do provide translation guides at all of the vote centers. If someone needs assistance by telephone in a different language, the Secretary of State's office has a translation hotline, and we can communicate with the voter that way, utilizing that hotline. So yeah, we find a way. And then, if a voter needs assistance at the vote center, they're allowed to bring up to two people to assist them at the booth, as long as it's not like their employer or their union representative, or there's one or two other forbidden people that can go assist them.
Interesting. Well, I applaud you for all your efforts to, preserve our democracy and get the vote out, and for keeping our elections fair and safe.
Well, I applaud the League for all of your partnership with us and all of your efforts in the community as well.
Well, thank you so much. So at this time, we're going to open it up to questions from the attendees, and I will turn it over to Betsy Patterson to facilitate the Q&A. Thank you very much, Michelle.
Thank you, Kathy. Hi, Betsy.
Hi, Michelle. Thank you again for a wonderful presentation. I'm going to try to ask some questions that were not covered exactly in your presentation. Okay. One of them has to do, you kind of touched on this, but I wanted just to get a little more emphasis about choosing the vote center locations, because one of the people said, well, I used to be able to walk to my polling place. It was so easy. And you said that you try to choose them near public transportation and spread them around the county. And the other thing that was asked about was, is it the vote center that makes it, what is it about the vote center that makes it possible for me to live in Ojai and vote in Thousand Oaks? I mean, how do they know what my ballot is there?
Okay. Yeah, as far as choosing the locations, we do try to make sure that it's someplace that's accessible. I mean, stuff like having parking, stuff like having ADA accessibility, ramps, and doors that are wide enough for wheelchairs to go through, space requirements. All of those factors are taken in consideration. And then we're kind of at the mercy of the location. Just because we are asking, they may not necessarily want to have us there for 4 days or 11 days or whatever. So hotels are actually pretty ideal. I mean, they're open 24 hours a day. They usually have a meeting space, but we tend to have to pay for those because we're utilizing that space for so long, versus them being able to rent it out for a wedding or something. What was the other part of your question? It was
it has to do with the fact that I can go vote at a vote center in Thousand Oaks and you can give me my Ojai ballot.
Yes. So again, that's where VoteCal comes in. We are able to look you up in VoteCal from any of our vote center locations and see, number one, check that you haven't voted yet. And number two, see which version of the ballot, of those 20 ballot types that we have for this election, which one pertains to you, where you live, and what your party registration is. So we can print the ballots on demand at the website, at the voting center. And that's how people can visit any location that's convenient for them, and not necessarily the one that's right up the street from their house.
Okay, excellent. So another question that we had, we have some members here who are involved in the high school voter registration project. So one of the things we find is that a lot of high school kids don't have an official signature yet, and they would like to print their name on the registration form. And we tend to discourage that, but is that okay? Can that be their official signature, and will they be able to vote when they show up?
Yeah. If that's what they choose as the way they sign their name, absolutely. They don't teach handwriting in schools anymore. So
well, they do, and they're starting to teach it again. But and most of these kids figure out, okay, we watch them, they practice like 15 times before they sign the form. One of our volunteers, though, did say, really, no, you can't draw a picture of a house as your signature. That's not going to work. So We have our limits there. One of the other,
but even with printing, I mean, it can look distinct enough, and I'm sure if we were to bring up someone whose signature is printed and bring up their signature history, I'm sure we would be able to see how consistent it is across every ballot that they cast.
Okay, well, that's good for us to know. Another question that came up was, well, just to make sure, my ballot, when I fill it out and I put it in that envelope and turn it in, my ballot itself doesn't have anything that identifies that it's me, does it? Or does it have something that identifies that that's my ballot? I know the outside envelope, the signature, and it may have a barcode on it, but actually, how about the actual ballot? Is there a way of identifying that it's my ballot so you could tell how I voted?
No, there's no identifying information on the ballot. It's in fact, when the vote by mail ballots come in and they're run through the machine, and the signature, the barcode is scanned. Once it's approved, the signature matches, everything's good. Then we take it to the openers, and it slices off the top, and then the ballot is removed, and the ballot goes this way, the envelope goes that way, and there's no connection anymore to whose ballot that is. So it's not, I think what the person who's asking may be referring to is they may have noticed that there's like a numbering, excuse me, on each of the ballots, just from, like, say we print 5,000 copies of ballot type A, and they're numbered 1, 2, 3, 4, all the way to 5,000. But that number isn't captured anywhere in the voter's record. It'll indicate that they received ballot type A, but it doesn't say they received ballot type A number 137. Do you see what I mean?
Yep. I think that answers their question. And there was a question also about when actually the election is done, the canvass is done, all the ballots are cured, and you certify that these are the election results. How do those election results get to the Secretary of State?
Yeah, we submit a report to the Secretary of State, and it's not just at the end, it's all the way through. So all of those updated ballot counts that we're providing, posted on our website, twice a week, leading up through the end of the canvass. Those are also being reported at the same time to the Secretary of State. So anytime we post updated reports, we also have to provide the number of estimated number of ballots remaining. So those would be like the provisionals and the conditional voter registration provisionals that we are still researching, any uncured ballots, uncured VBMs that we are waiting to hear back from the voter on, those kinds of things. Those are the ones that are like the last ones to get finalized. And we do have a deadline for people to cure. If we don't hear from them by this date, then we go ahead and say, okay, these ballots aren't going to be submitted because we didn't hear back from the voter.
Okay, all right. Well, I think we have covered all the questions that were in the chat and some that we got when people registered.
Okay.
We do have a quick poll for people who are still here to take, but I don't know whether Kathy wants me to do that now or wait until the end of the session. Maybe she can tell me.
Go ahead. Do you mind waiting a minute for a quick poll, Michelle?
Sure. Yeah.
I'm sorry. We do have one more question.
Okay.
Are the ballots counted right after one is sent in, or do they wait until election night to actually count them? Can you describe that process of what happens to the ballots as they arrive to the election office, and then at 8 o'clock on election night, what happens?
Yeah, so election code allows us to start processing ballots early. So the vote by mail ballots that come in, some people like to vote right away, get it sent in, and get it out off of their mind. Once they're signature verified, we can go ahead and start processing those. So what that means is the signature is checked, the ballot is flattened to make sure that it can be fed through the machine. And we can, once we have a good sized batch, we can run that batch, and the data is held. It's raw data that's held until the final close of election night, 8 p.m. is when we're able to merge that data to get the first vote counts, and that's what's posted on the website shortly after 8.
Okay, so the votes don't get counted as they come in. They get processed and the data gets accumulated, but you don't know how many votes John Smith actually got until 8 o'clock election night when that data is merged with the candidates.
Correct.
All right. I think that is all of the questions that we have now.
So I would like to thank Michelle very much for joining us today, for sharing all this important information, and also for all that you do, you and your office. And you know, it sometimes must seem like a thankless job, but it is so important to our democracy, and we really appreciate it. Before I make my final remarks, is there anything you'd like to add, Michelle, or anything you'd like to say?
Well, thank you everybody for joining today. I could probably go on all day, so it would be lunch and dinner with the league if I if I was allowed to, if I didn't have a time limit. So thank you again for your time today.
Oh, well, thank you. And Michelle, I've heard her self-described as an election nerd, so she probably could talk quite a bit about it, but I'm sorry we had to cut her off. I want to thank everybody who attended today for attending. Please let your friends know that the recording of this session will be available on our website within 48 hours from today. So if you have friends who weren't able to make it at this time, or people you think who could benefit from the information, please refer them to our website. Also, if you have any ideas or suggestions for future Lunch and Learn with the League topics, please reach out and let us know. You can put it into the chat now, or you can always email our email address. Thanks again for being here, Michelle. We really appreciate it, and we appreciate all you do. Well, thank you, everybody.
Bye, Michelle.
Bye-bye.